Mhm, 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 mhm.
Okay.
Oh, there we are.
You're going to see me turning to the left a lot more tonight, Dan,
Why?
because I'm gradually setting up my office, and I got a big 27-inch supercomputer over here now.
Oh, well.
Yeah, I'm slowly professionalizing. Fake it till you make it, right?
Oh, this is in your actual professional office?
No, this is the home office.
Oh, okay.
This is the home office, which, we moved into our new house back in the fall, and my wife has been on me to finally get the office decorated. Not because she wants to spend any time in here, but she's annoyed that it's the last room in the house that's unfinished. So
Hmm.
naturally, the first thing that I bought is a toy for myself.
Of course.
I'll get to the cosmetics at some point. All right. Good evening,
Yeah,
everybody
because
logging on.
you're not in the room with the fireplace tonight.
I'm not in the room with the cool fireplace.
Yeah, right. Well, that's probably just as well on a very warm night like tonight.
I was
You don't want to be
remanded to a room
reminded
with
of
a
a
door.
fireplace.
So Dan, while we're getting everything set up here,
Yes,
you and I have the same barber.
we do. And don't we look wonderful?
We
If I
do.
must say so myself.
It's very nice of you to say so.
Of course, you have a bit more hair than I do, Matt.
It's all I really have going for myself, Dan.
Yeah, well, that's what I used to say too. I used to say
Everybody's entitled to one advantage in
you
life, and
have a
I've got a head of
wonderful
hair.
head of hair. You have a wonderful head of hair.
So how did this come up? That's the thing I didn't ask you.
It's very, very funny. I've been going to this barber, um, not quite a year. I started going right after the barber shops reopened. As soon as they reopened, that's when I went. And in the course of chatting with him, then like the last time I was with him, it was the first time I saw him without his mask, and the first time I had my mask off. So it was we thought it was just very funny that we had he had been cutting my hair all this time,
And he's never really seen your face.
no. And so I took a picture out front of the barber shop of the two of us and put it on Facebook. And lo and behold, Matt, your mother revealed she recognized this young man, and she revealed that she was his sixth grade teacher.
So there was this game back in the 90s that was popular, 6 Degrees from Kevin Bacon. You could play that with my mother in South Jersey. Everybody is 6 degrees from Wendy Rooney. Partly because she's a school teacher. And when you're a school teacher, you touch a lot of lives and you interact with a lot of kids over the course of a long career. But also she talks to everyone. When I say everyone, Todd, I mean absolutely everyone about anything. It can be an asset. Occasionally it's a curse, but most of the time, Mom, if you're watching this, it's definitely a good thing.
So when I went to have my hair cut today, I said, well, I bring you greetings from your sixth grade teacher. And he's like, oh, Mrs. Rooney. I said,
we're gonna get him tons of business just based off the Wendy Rooney connection.
And then he says, well, I cut her son's hair. And I said, Matt Rooney? He said, yeah. I said, all right, I'm out of here. You're not going to be my barber anymore. If you're Matt Rooney's barber, I'm getting the hell out of here.
But look at this, Dan. This could be you. I mean, not really, but there's something to aspire to. And on that classy note, folks, I want to welcome you to another fun and punchy and entertaining and hopefully tonight informative edition of Save Jersey Live. I am, of course, Matt Rooney, proprietor of SaveJersey.com, your favorite political web space in New Jersey. And I am joined, as per usual, by my good friend Dan Cerrucci. We not only share a Facebook Live, we also, as you heard a moment ago, apparently share a barber. So our commonalities continue to stack up, my friend. How are you this evening?
I'm fine as far as I can tell.
Well, any day above ground's a good day, Dan. And you look good. You're looking
Thank you.
fine. Your home library is as impressive as ever. The orange polo compliments you.
Thank you.
It's all good. It's all good.
Thank you.
Before I introduce tonight's guest, just a couple of housekeeping notes. First and foremost, and some of you are going to know this, we did something big at Save Jersey this week, something that some of you have been asking me to do for literally years, and I just never got around to it because there's other things going on in life, kids, work, other obligations. We've opened a Save Jersey store. And amazingly, people are buying stuff. The hot item right now, Dan, are the fire Murphy. I almost said fire Corzine because that's the last time we had a store. Fire Murphy magnets. Save Jersey Fire Murphy. They're going like hotcakes.
Wow.
Yeah, we sold, I think, a couple dozen of them today. I got to go check, but people are eating these things up. Although I got a complaint from some people. Well, maybe complaint's too strong, but they were pointing out that sometimes, unfortunately, in this toxic climate of ours, people steal these things. So they want a bumper sticker. It's a very personal thing. I've always been one of those people, not that I drive $50,000 cars or anything, but I always hate putting a sticker on a nice, clean car. So it wasn't my first instinct, but if you want a bumper sticker, we'll give you a bumper sticker. So I'm going to work on that. But
the new bumper stickers, well, I say new because I remember paper bumper stickers, but the bumper stickers today peel very nicely and easily off of the car after you no longer want them on the car, and they really don't make a mark on the car.
So you're saying the technology's gotten a lot better.
Yeah, because they're vinyl or they're plastic or whatever they are, and they just peel evenly off the car when you're ready to take them off the car. That's been my experience.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
So, okay, that's how we're going to play it then. I'm going to confirm that the store we're going through has the new technology version of the bumper sticker, because I don't want to be responsible for junking up people's cars. And if it's the right kind of bumper sticker, then we will honor what the masses are demanding, and we will give them. And Dan, your magnet's on the way, unless you want a bumper sticker.
Oh, thank you so much.
It's up to you, Dan. Dealer's choice.
Fine, I'll take a magnet. By the way, I have had magnets stolen.
It happens.
Most recently, my Villanova magnet was stolen. But there's a lot of, what can I tell you? There's just a lot of Villanova fans out there.
There are a lot of, it could have just been somebody that wanted the sticker. Maybe it wasn't even malicious. It didn't necessarily have to be a Temple basketball fan.
That's right. It was.
Something else I wanted to point out at the beginning of the show, because people want to know where we're going in terms of our guest list for the coming weeks. We've got some fantastic guests lined up, and I'm excited because we're trying to get variety. Next week on July 7th, remember we're always on Wednesday at 8 o'clock. We have Assemblyman Brian Bergen from Morris County, who is newer to the assembly, but he's been making some waves. So we're looking forward to talking to Brian. July 14th, we have the return of Dr. Jonathan Lesser, our energy expert, who was, I think, maybe our most viewed video after Jack Chittarelli, since we started this show. It was an extremely popular video, and then I accidentally deleted it. But it was a great accidental marketing technique because now people really want him back, because he was so funny and entertaining and informative. So by popular demand, Dr. Jonathan Lesser back on July 14th. Then on July 21st, State Senator Declan O'Scanlan from Monmouth County. We're moving a little bit further south now for Bergen, who is one of my favorites. He always is down for a lively conversation.
Love the guy. He's fantastic.
And he's been great on the budget. And then July 28th, we have our friend and sponsor, Anthony Calandro of the Gun for Hire radio program. He also has a gun range up in North Jersey. He's a firearms expert. He just wrote a book. Going to have him on to talk about that. We have more people lined up too, but I have to kind of give it to you in dribs and drabs because I need you to keep coming back. So plenty of programming going through the summer months. We're going to the beach, but we're not taking off. So keep checking back every Wednesday. All right, on to tonight's business. So I made a conscious decision this week. I should have made it a little sooner, but I'm a procrastinator. I don't know what to tell you. That I wanted to kind of take a little pause from politics and celebrate our country's birthday. Because once again, America, you don't look a day over 25, old girl, is getting ready for another birthday. And it's a big one. Everyone's a big one because we're still here. A lot of people at the beginning of our country did not think that was going to be the case. It was an open question. And I think it's easy to forget because unfortunately it doesn't get enough emphasis in today's education system and today's culture that New Jersey has a very unique Revolutionary War history. We are, as I'm sure you remember from grade school, literally the crossroads of the American Revolution. So I went to searching for someone who not only has some Jersey roots, but also has some expertise on the battles that went down in New Jersey back in the 1770s, at the end of the 18th century, that shaped not only our nation's history and world history, but also very much New Jersey history. We have with us tonight the one, the only Todd Braisted. How you doing tonight, Todd?
I'm good, Matt. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's a pleasure to have you. And I can't tell you how excited I am for this. I don't know a fraction what you do on this topic, but like many people, I'm sure you run into at historical society meetings and other lectures. I'm a nerd for history. So I'm looking forward to learning.
That's a good thing.
A little bit of background, and this is from the journal, The American Revolution, which is how I first became familiar with Todd. Todd, he's an author, he's a researcher of Loyalist military studies. His primary focus, and one of the things that fascinates me that we got to talk about, is Loyalist military personnel, infrastructure, and campaigns in North America. Since 1979, Todd has amassed and transcribed over 40,000 pages, not 400, not 4,000, 40,000 pages of Loyalist and related material from archives and private collections all around the world. He's been on PBS. He's noted in this area of his field. And because we always love the Jersey angle, he's a past president of the Bergen County Historical Society. So quite a resume. My first question for you tonight, Todd, I think is maybe an obvious one for somebody that's always been fascinated by history, fascinated by the American Revolution, but maybe did something boring with their life, like became a lawyer, or Dan actually worked with lawyers. How does one become an historian, and how did your appetite first emerge for history and for the American Revolution in particular?
Well, by way of full disclosure, I worked in the legal department of Unilever for 19 years. So I am not a professional historian. I do work for a living.
So you were driven to this, is what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Historians don't make money.
Yeah.
Authors don't make money. So 9 out of 10 people who get into this have day jobs, because you can write books and have fun with them, but you're not going to be able to feed your family. You're not going to be able to feed yourself. So in good years, it's beer money. But I got really interested in this when I was a kid growing up, like probably happens to a lot of folks. And the day I pitched my last Little League game when I was 12 was the day my uncle and cousin took me to a little bicentennial event in the great big town of Rockley, New Jersey, population 600, where I actually work these days. And there was a reenactment group there with a cannon. And what 12-year-old doesn't love cannons? So I got really excited. My cousin got excited. My uncle was very tolerant and said, well, let's go talk to them. And we talked to them, and the three of us joined on the spot. Went home and told my father, and he joined, called my best friends, and he joined along with his cousin and his uncle. So we swelled the numbers of this little group. almost by 50% in one afternoon, and did the bicentennial with them and whatnot. And it sort of steamrolled from there. Within a year, we decided this wasn't a good fit for us. And we wanted to join another group, but we didn't really want to be on the same side with this group anymore. So we had to form our own group, the seven of us. And since we wanted to be on the other side, we decided to form a loyalist group. And we all lived in Bergen County. I still live in Bergen County. And so we looked around at what groups were around here, and turned out Bergen County didn't raise a regiment for George Washington. They raised a whole regiment for King George. So
that's fascinating. And I mean, again, just having read a little bit about this, like a lot of people, I know that there was a large and active loyalist population in New York City during the American Revolution. Is that the explanation for Bergen County's orientation, proximity to New York, or was there something else that historians think was going on there?
Well, the two big loyalist counties of New Jersey were Bergen and Monmouth. We know pretty much of how big a population there was by the number of properties confiscated by the state of New Jersey.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, of course, anyone maintaining their allegiance to King George was right after the Declaration of Independence, was liable to be tried for high treason against the state. And if you were tried, whether you were in person or not, the state could declare you guilty and then send the sheriff to seize your property, all real and personal property, and auction it off to all your neighbors. And that was one of the ways states, and it wasn't just New Jersey, it was all the states, financed or helped finance the American Revolution. And in Bergen County, 134 different properties were confiscated by the state of New Jersey, more than any other county in the state. Now, why there were so many is open to debate. People think of loyalists as, these people are just over from England, and that's why they're fighting for King George. Well, most of Bergen County was not English, and most of the people in Bergen County who were loyalists had never been to England. They weren't from England. Bergen County has had a very multicultural population.
A lot of Dutch, for instance.
Well, that's the people think Dutch, but actually Dutch was not an overwhelming, wasn't even a majority. You had Dutch, you had French Huguenot, you had Germans. I live in Malwa. This area, this Ramapo area, was full of Germans working in the iron mines of Ringwood and Sterling Forest. So you have a lot of German population. You do have English, you do have Scotch, you do have Irish, you have Swiss, you have Polish. The Bergen County Historical Society has its headquarters at historic Newbridge Landing in the home, the original house of a man named John Zabriskie. Zabriskie isn't Dutch. Zabriskie was Polish. And across the river in River Edge, the property there was owned by Abraham Van Buskirk, who would raise this loyalist regiment for the British. He wasn't British, Van Buskirk. He wasn't even Dutch. Van Buskirk was a made-up name. When they immigrated from Denmark, their name was Andresen. And you had 20% of Bergen County was a Black population. So you had—
We've been a melting pot in New Jersey from the very beginning, before the beginning.
Yeah, so loyalty wasn't what people generally perceive as just, snooty English people walking around drinking tea and waving British flags. It was, there was all sorts of socioeconomic, and economics is always at a root of everybody's interest in one way or another. I tell people 80% of the documents on the revolution that still exist today are one way or another finance related. And that's very true. If you take out all the finance related documents in the American Revolution, we'd have very little. You'd have a lot more space in the archives, let's put it that way.
And one of these loyalists, and I found this story fascinating, was the illegitimate son of Benjamin Franklin, that being William Franklin. And he was a stalwart loyalist. And this caused quite a rupture in the relationship between Benjamin Franklin and it was his illegitimate son, but it was still his son. And that's a fascinating story, Todd.
Well, absolutely. Franklin was actually a very popular governor. In Bergen County at the time, we have 70 towns in Bergen County now.
He was the governor of New Jersey, William Franklin.
Right.
Yeah.
In Bergen County, at the time, one of the 6 townships was Franklin Township, named not after Benjamin, but after William. I live a mile away from Franklin Turnpike, named after William Franklin. He founded Rutgers. He was pretty popular. He was not removed from office until June of 1776. In fact, on this day, I posted on my Facebook page, there's a cool letter from George Washington himself, who was in New York City at the time, on this date in 1776, writing to the officer commanding the guard who was escorting William Franklin from Perth Amboy up to his place of imprisonment, which was going to be in Connecticut, except they stopped to rest in Hackensack here in Bergen County. And Washington's eyes went wide when he found out, because Bergen County was so loyalist, he thought that the people would rise up and free Franklin. So he wrote this letter to this captain saying, don't stop there, just keep going, get this man to Connecticut, because they were afraid people would try and rescue him. But Ben Franklin never lifted a finger to help William during his confinement. William wrote letters to Washington, to Congress, and to Ben, because William Franklin's wife had been exiled to New York City after the British took New York, and she was ill over the winter of 1777, 1778. William Franklin found this out while he was in confinement, and he wrote saying, please let me go on parole and be with my wife to take care of her. Washington apologized and said, I'd love to help you, but you're not a prisoner to me, you're a prisoner to the state of New Jersey. And Congress basically said the same thing. And
we know how to hold a grudge here.
Yeah, and William Franklin's wife died as a result, and he never saw her again. And when he was exchanged in November of 1778, he was a very angry man. So
father and son digging in their heels. It's a tale as old as time. But and I wondered maybe if that was one of the reasons why you were fascinated by the loyalist angle, because brother versus brother, father versus son, these have always been some of the most compelling stories in human history, all the way back to Cain and Abel in the Bible. Certainly one of the reasons the Civil War aspects of that have been romanticized, because there's so many great brother versus brother stories. In New Jersey, sometimes the more I learn about it, Todd, it feels less like a revolution and more like a civil war. Is that fair?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. You got time for a little story?
Absolutely. That's why you're here, because Dan and I are eating this up.
Well, our friends in Crossroads of the American Revolution came out with a wonderful program called Meet Your Revolutionary Neighbor. And they got a whole bunch of us together to do research and focus on biographies of individual people that we thought were representative. And I focused on one family here in Bergen County, the Demarest family. And the father was a loyalist. He joined this guy, Abraham Van Buskirk, at Newbridge, and enlisted in his regiment, and was almost immediately captured by the Americans and imprisoned, apparently escaped, didn't go back to his regiment, went back to home where he lived in modern New Milford, and rejoined his wife and their kid, and who was, becoming in his mid-teens. And when chance had it, in 1779, Dad's old regiment shows up on their doorstep And he embraces them and goes, hey, guys, I've been looking for you. Yeah, I escaped from prison, so I'm going to rejoin the regiment. And left his wife and his kid again. And his son is a patriot and is serving in the county militia. All right. The Bergen County militia is commanded by a guy named Tunis Dye. Abraham Van Buskirk, this guy Demarest's commanding officer, is married to Jane Dye, Tunis Dye's daughter. So the leading loyalist of Bergen County is married to the leading rebel's daughter. And this guy goes off, and dad eventually joins another regiment. And this kid is serving in the militia against dad's side. And in 1781, dad's new regiment has a raid at New Milford and captures his son and brings him back. And there's this father and son meeting and says, listen, you don't have to go to New York City as a prisoner. Join me and serve the British, and you don't have to go to prison. And the son says, nope, not at all. Not going to do it. And ends up in prison in New York City and eventually gets exchanged a few weeks later and goes back home. Now, if you think this story has a happy ending, no. It's Bergen County, it's New Jersey. Fun things are going to happen.
We just went from Romeo and Juliet, which is kind of dark to begin with, to now I feel like we're moving in a Game of Thrones direction.
Oh, yeah. So one day, Adam Boyd, who would become a New Jersey politician, but at this point, he's the sheriff of Bergen County and a lieutenant in the militia. So he commands at some point this kid's son. So he shows up at their door in New Milford one day, and Jane Demarest, the mother, opens the door and says, hi, how you doing? He's like, oh, I'm good. Thanks for asking. It's great that your son chose our side and he's serving as a good militiaman, but it's the 18th century and you have no property rights and your husband's a loyalist. So I'm here to confiscate your house. She's like, no. My son serves with you. We're on your side. Yes, but like I said, it's the 18th century and you're a woman. So time for you to leave. So they confiscated her. They kicked her out of the house and confiscated it.
Good God, Dan. We think we have it bad.
Yeah. So I believe she's buried in New Milford today. He ends up settling in what is now Ontario, has a new wife and totally new life.
Well, quite a few of the loyalists did go to Canada or other British territories, right? They did exile. Of course, some of them, like William Franklin, went all the way back to England.
Franklin went to England. Many loyalists, when somebody enlisted in the loyalist military during the war, one of the reasons to enlist was actually to better yourself. Consider it a GI Bill for the British. They were promised, for a regular enlisted soldier, 100 acres of free land. Now, common soldiers of the time, and this is for both sides, were not wealthy people. They were oftentimes not landowners. They were laborers. They were not, the image of the Minuteman as a farmer leaving the fields. Well, most of the guys leaving the fields worked for a farmer. They didn't own the land. So this enticement for land was big, and eventually the British opened it up. If you went off with your wife and your kids, each of your dependents got 50 acres of land. So if you were married, you were a soldier, a private soldier, married with 2 kids, that's 250 acres of land. That makes you a landowner, a landholder. So you can, be a higher member of society back then. Now, at the end of the war, where were the British going to give out this land? During the war, they had promised to give it away in New York, some as far away as the Mississippi. Well, they were no longer in a position to do that. So they had to look around, as you mentioned, what else is left in North America. And for the most part, that is what we now refer to as Canada. Canada, in the strictest sense in the 18th century, was only Quebec. All right. Nova Scotia was considered part of the American colonies, and Quebec itself extended all the way westward. The new colonies, the new provinces of Upper Canada, which is now Ontario, New Brunswick, was carved out from Nova Scotia in 1784. So those are places where tens of thousands of loyalists went to. Abraham Van Buskirk, our friend from Newbridge, and his wife Jane settled in Shelburne, Nova Scotia. You ever been to Shelburne, Nova Scotia? No, there's no shame in saying no.
Couldn't find it on a map.
No. It's a town of about 2,500 people today. But in 1784, 85, it was one of the largest cities in North America. In April 1783, there was not a house there. It was settled entirely by about 14 to 15,000 loyalists.
That's remarkable.
Yeah.
I mean, at the time, there was only about, I could be wrong, but wasn't there about 7,000 people in Philadelphia at the time? And it was the largest city in the colonies?
It was more than that. But yeah,
I remember it was a very small number.
It was bigger than that. Philadelphia and New York were your two biggest cities. Boston and Charleston being lesser, but Philadelphia was a pretty large city. But Shelburne blossomed into this huge, they called it the Loyalist utopia. And after 8 years of war, these folks were going to party like it was 1799. The British had provided a means for many of them to apply for compensation for their losses. You know, we mentioned before the states confiscated their property. Well, if you could prove your losses, and there's the key, if you could prove your losses with deeds and wills and things like that, the British would try and compensate you to some degree. And thousands of these loyalists received compensation. And well, after 8 years of war, being exiled, losing family members, all this sort of stuff, do you want to, start tilling a field again? Or do you want to start, going to balls and hanging out in bars and things like that, or doing all the fun stuff that, you really couldn't do a whole lot of, during the war. So they had a great time until the money ran out. And then they realized, and you build this giant city, there's really no way to make a living. There's no manufacturing. You're either going to be a fisherman or a farmer. And if you have a town lot, you can't farm. Right. So Shelburne went from a town of 14, 15,000 people to about 2,500 within 8 years.
Wow.
So Todd, when I learned American history, I don't remember learning very much about the Loyalists. And I have to confess that I was a fifth grade elementary school teacher, and I didn't teach, nor do I remember my wife, who was also an elementary school teacher, teaching much about the Loyalists. Are kids today learning anything about the Loyalists at all when they learn American history? Do they know the names of these people? Or that there even were such people?
That's an excellent question, and I wish I knew the answer. Now, I do have some friends who are teachers, who are reenactors or authors or whatnot, and they do a fantastic job. Obviously, with each passing year, there's just one more year of history to teach, by definition. And you being a teacher, that you only get so much time to cram in so many things. And there's so much cool stuff over the course of our country's history. You've got to leave stuff out. So I didn't know much about, I wasn't taught much about this in school. The reason I got interested in Loyalists, really, I'd read an article from a 1960 Bergen County Historical Society annual. And the last sentence of it said, "This is a subject that requires a great deal of more study in the future." And I realized when I was in high school, I realized that there's an opportunity here for a niche marketing, and good capitalist that I am, I could somehow, work towards becoming an expert in this field that not many people, I'm not going to say any, but not many people were really going towards. And if you can become proficient in a subject, there's going to be a place for you somewhere. And it just sort of rolled from there.
By the way, to fill in the blanks here from before, I just looked it up through the miracle of the internet. About 40,000 in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And this article is pointing out that that would fill about half of Lincoln Financial Field. So you could fit about half. You could fit Philadelphia's entire Revolutionary War population and into Lincoln Financial Field, and still have plenty of room for social distancing. So there you go. That's something to think about. One thing that I had a question about, and it's kind of on the topic of maybe what's taught a certain way or why things get emphasis and other things don't. Valley Forge, obviously a very important moment in the American Revolution, and one that gets quite a bit of conversation. Maybe some of that has to do with Thomas Paine. I don't know, but Valley Forge is something that even somebody who's very casual in their knowledge of the American Revolution will invoke if you ask them to name a famous moment or a famous place. Washington's encampment in Morristown, I think you could argue that it had just as much significance from my understanding of it, tactically, strategically, and he was there for quite a while. I guess I'd like you to speak to that, Todd. And also, we've talked so much about how New Jersey had these very active loyalist pockets. While the demographics of New Jersey have changed, the geography hasn't changed insofar as, Morristown and Bergen County still very close. It would seem to me kind of an odd place to create an encampment or have your encampment so close to these massive loyalist pockets. Why did Washington decide to park there during that hard winter?
Washington, first off, excellent points. The Washington's biggest encampment at Morristown was during the hardest winter of what they said in living memory, the winter of 1779, 1780. To give you an idea, and I gave a lecture on this winter over the past year. It froze New York Harbor down to Sandy Hook. Staten Island, which was occupied by the British, was reprovisioned from New York City by sleigh.
Wow.
They would take the sleighs from Lower Manhattan, ride across the ice to Paulus Hook, which was the main British post.
In Jersey City now.
It's Jersey City. Excellent.
Yeah.
Go on land there, go down to Bergen Point, which is now Bayonne, and cross over the ice. The bridge was not available. Cross over the ice from Bayonne to Staten Island. Washington marched under William Alexander, Lord Sterling, a New Jersey Continental officer, 2,700 men with artillery and cavalry over the Kills to attack Staten Island. And this really had worried the British, because the main British army had sailed south in December to capture Charleston, South Carolina, leaving Manhattan and Staten Island and Long Island with a small garrison. What had always protected New York City for the British, and why it was never going to be able to be held by Washington, was because they're all islands, and the Americans do not have a real navy. The Royal Navy is going to just keep those rivers and bays open, and cut off any American troops that try and land there. But once the ice froze everything, there's no more island. It's all one big happy landmass. So Washington has got his troops up in Morristown behind the Watchung Mountains. It's more he thinks he's safe up there from any quick British thrust from New York. The British were not going to have their army march out to Morristown, especially that winter, because there were just too few British troops in New York City. They had just enough to garrison it. However, the British commanders at New York during that winter used the opportunity to keep Washington's troops off guard. What Washington did was detach small numbers of troops from Morristown to places like Paramus, Elizabeth, Newark, Chatham, to keep sort of a crescent around the British troops in Westchester and Connecticut as well, to keep tabs on the British. What the British did was launch raids against all those outposts, none of which was more than 250 men. And the British saw the opportunity. They knew exactly where Washington was. And for those who don't, he was at the Ford Mansion. Jacob Ford was a Morris County militia colonel who died early in 77, and his widow lived there. Well, it's a beautiful mansion, and Washington decided to use that as his headquarters. Well, the army itself is not at the Ford Mansion, it's at Jockey Hollow, which, if you ever taken Route 287, is about 5 miles down the road to the west, to the northwest.
Sometimes it can take you an hour, but it's really not that far away.
Or scarily, it could take you 2 minutes. And so the British saw this and actually devised a scheme to have a lightning cavalry thrust against Morristown with 80 cavalry, half loyalist, half British, to kidnap George Washington from the Ford Mansion, with all sorts of diversionary raids in Elizabeth and Perth Amboy and all this sort of stuff to keep the Americans having no idea what was going on. The snow was over 4 feet deep, and the ice kept cutting the legs of the horses of the cavalry. They never got further than Hackensack. They had to turn around and go back. And all of a sudden, Washington's officers are going, there was a lot of activity last night. And one of them, Arthur St. Clair, said, Excellency, I think they were coming for you. Washington's like, nah, I don't think so. But he ordered his whole lifeguard then encamped at the Ford Mansion just in case. But the reason Valley Forge gets more press or publicity or whatnot, and both, by the way, Valley Forge and Morristown, Jockey Hollow, are both national parks. They're both run by the National Park Service, and both certainly worthy of a visit. Maybe this weekend, 4th of July weekend, great time to visit our historic sites. But Washington's army had vastly improved in certain ways from the time of Valley Forge to the time of Morristown, particularly in terms of sanitation. I know that sounds like just a basic thing, but when you figure the Continental Army started out in the beginning of the war, these were not professional soldiers. These people had never been drawn together in bodies before, and disease became rampant. 9 out of 10 deaths in the American Revolution were from disease, not bullets. So once you learn that sort of hygiene, once you learn systems that can better provide for clothing and food and whatnot, although the food was a little iffy at times at Morristown, it was a better situation than it was at Valley Forge. But Washington also furloughed a lot of the army at Valley Forge, so not the entire army was not there. It did allow troops to go home, which sounds like a very great humanitarian gesture, but it also eases the burden of supply.
Don't have to feed them.
Right, exactly. So
I had no idea the angle because generally when we think of bad weather in the Revolution, we think of Washington and the hardships that his troops endured in their fight for freedom. I never really thought about it as something that also stymied the British. And that's not the only time that weather aided Washington and his forces. One of my favorite stories is how in his evacuation from New York, Washington was saved by this mysterious fog that was extremely rare climatically for that part of the world. So
you never heard of the fog of war?
Well, I always thought it was because all the cannons were going off. I'm the amateur, but lo and behold, it was a literal fog for Washington. So
Yeah.
maybe there was a little bit of divine providence at work.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. I mean, previous to that, 2 nights before, Washington had been soundly defeated in his first major battle, which was the Battle of Brooklyn. And, he needed to get back to Manhattan with the bulk of his troops before the Royal Navy, which was having a devil of a time with the tides and whatnot. First, the Americans would have to evacuate Governor's Island. You folks are, I'm no doubt familiar with the doings of New York Harbor. And they were, as you mentioned, this fog, and the British were able to, not see anything. And the Royal Navy was not able to move. They kept quiet, and they got to Manhattan safe. They left some, obviously some stores behind and whatnot. And Governor's Island was immediately evacuated as well before the Royal Navy occupied there. And of course, Washington being in Manhattan. And when you talk New York City, you're only talking real lower Manhattan. All right. The New York City of today is not anything like the New York City of then. It's just real lower Manhattan. So if you've seen National Treasure, you're familiar with where that takes place. That's lower Manhattan. That's New York City. And
well, I know most of these places by dining spots, like a lot of people. Like I know we talked about Paulus Hook earlier. The reason why I always remember that is because they have Lighthorse. I think it's called Lighthorse Tavern, which is a great little restaurant that's right there that have the best braised ribs I've ever had in my life. They're absolutely delicious.
I'm hoping it's still there.
Yeah, and then of course I forget the name. What's that tavern downtown in
Francis Tavern.
Thank you. Yes, I've eaten there too.
Yep.
And Washington, what did Washington do there?
His farewell address to the officers of the Continental Army.
His farewell address.
Yep. When New York City was evacuated on November 25th, 1783, which for years was celebrated as a holiday, Evacuation Day. Washington marched in with, the small remains of his troops. Most of the Continental Army had been furloughed home, so they just kept a few troops for whatever purpose. So when they marched in, he wanted to resign his commission as quickly as possible. So he wanted to get on to Congress. So before he crossed the ferry from New York City to Paulus Hook, he had this farewell dinner at Francis Tavern with his senior Continental generals, and lots of crying, lots of manly hugs, all that sort of good stuff. And he said goodbye, and then sailed off, well, as far as one can sail across the Hudson, into the sunset, and met Congress and resigned his commission. And you think about Washington and the power he really had in 1782, 83. And if anyone's ever heard of what happened at Newburgh, which was the last encampment of the Continental Army up in New York, there was a great murmur among many officers of the Continental Army who were very upset with Congress for non-payment, arrears of pay, all this sort of stuff. These folks had fought the war faithfully, survived the war, won the war, and they felt that they were not being taken care of. And there was a good amount of clandestine debate about whether or not to rise up with Washington and proclaim him king, which the army probably would have supported, and Congress would have been powerless in a physical sense to have stopped. But Washington masterfully diffused the situation, getting in front of these officers in what they call the Temple Building. There's a reconstruction of it there now. And he approaches what I guess a podium or something, and all these officers are sitting there, and there's this pause, and he's going to read something, and he says, you'll excuse me for 1 second. And he goes into his pocket and he takes out a case and he opens up glasses and he puts glasses on and says that I've lost my, I've given my vision in the service of my country the last few years. All that. They all start bawling at that one.
A bunch of grown men just lost it.
Yeah. So no more king, no more rising up against Congress, that sort of thing.
He shamed them with this self-effacing commentary on how he had aged, and it's something only he could have delivered. But to your point, I mean, he was our Cincinnatus. That's what made him so special. We've had many great presidents since. We've had some lousy ones too. We'll let you decide your own list, folks. But certainly, you can't imagine many of them being able to pull off what he did, and also walking away from power the way that he did.
Yeah, I mean, how many people do that? The whole country was there for your taking, in the very literal sense.
They would have put a crown on his head.
Yeah.
So
George the
Todd,
First.
What would you say, Todd? About 20% of the colonists were loyalists. How did that break down?
That's a question almost everybody asks me, and what I try and tell folks, not to put off the question, but it's impossible to tell.
There was no Gallup polling back then.
Well, right, exactly. There was no Gallup polling, and the British were really in very few places in America. They were in a few of the major cities, and other than like New York, only for brief amounts of time. Loyalists only really showed themselves when the British Army was around. So if the British Army is not in 95% of the country, these folks aren't walking around with a British flag, taped to their coat saying, "Yay, King George." They're keeping quiet because they see what happens when somebody gets outspoken. And whenever somebody does get outspoken for like drinking the king's health, or here in Bergen County, someone was arrested for lamenting the British didn't have a cannon in a late skirmish. You tend to keep your mouth shut, and you can't refuse militia duty. You can try, but you get fined heavily. So that's why a lot of people hired substitutes for militia service. And militia was mandatory military service for anyone 16 to 60 years old.
I didn't know you could hire substitutes, though. I know that was a hot button issue during the Civil War, but in the American
Revolution as well. And definitely some loyalists and many patriots hired substitutes as well. People made, it wasn't their side gig, it was their primary gig, serving as a substitute for other people. You hire yourself as I'm not going to say a mercenary, but you're a soldier for hire.
We have a sense of how many New Jerseyans served in the Revolutionary War on one side or the other? Or is it so complicated because there's militia groups, there's a lot of mix-up?
Well, yes, it is a lot of mix-up, and I'll tell you why it's also impossible to quantify, because so many served on both sides at one time or another. And I'm not even talking about guys in the ranks, officers as well. I mentioned, I keep going back to this guy, Abraham Van Buskirk, here in Bergen County. Well, during 1776, before he joined the British, he was a surgeon under Tunis Dye in the Bergen County Militia. Half the officers that came into his regiment were Bergen County Militia officers, ostensibly serving the Patriots. One guy in the New Jersey Continental Line, a captain from Sussex County, named John Bud Scott, joined a loyalist regiment in 1778, which was raised but nothing but deserters from the Continental Army. This was a regiment raised by a guy named Rodolphus Ritzema, who was the colonel of one of the New York Continental regiments. And he named his regiment, and it's my favorite name, the Royal American Reformees. I always just picture these guys in orange jumpsuits picking up trash on the side of the highway. But
Rudolphus just sounds villainous.
Oh,
and you're not supposed to judge a book by its cover, but that's a villainous sounding name for a turncoat.
Oh yeah, I've got a good article on Journal of the American Revolution's website, which by the way is allthingsliberty.com. That's the first cheap plug of the night.
Allthingsliberty.com. We'll make sure we share that when we share the video.
I've got an article there on a guy named William Shoemaker, who was a Continental soldier in the 2nd New Jersey Regiment, deserted from them to try and join the British in 1777, was captured, brought back to his regiment, was part of a detail in 1780 to help guard clandestinely obtained blankets from New York City, because Washington's army at Morristown was short of blankets. So they had this secret operation to buy blankets in New York City, and he was sent to guard them. Well, most of that detachment went off back to Morristown, except for a rear guard that Shoemaker was a part of, which was captured by the loyalist group, the New Jersey Volunteers, who he immediately enlisted with the next day. This was the group he tried to desert to back in 77. Well, in his U.S. pension application after the war, he mentions that he was wounded grievously in the Battle of Springfield, which was June of 1780. He was, but he was fighting for the New Jersey Volunteers against his old regiment, the 2nd New Jersey, and was wounded by them. He served in the New Jersey Volunteers the rest of the war, was discharged in New York in 1783, and eventually made his way out west, I think to Ohio, where he applied successfully for a United States pension once the pension laws were passed, starting in 1818. And there's scores of pension applications, U.S. taxpayer.
That's the most New Jersey thing we've gotten into tonight. All of these people making decisions based upon pensions.
Oh yeah.
Pension politics never goes away.
The people, this is the fun part about history. This is the stuff you're not going to read about in schools. And
your point's not invalid. I mean, we could go on. That's a topic for another time about what we're teaching in schools and how to teach it. It's a hot button issue, but you wish there was a way to at least get kids or have kids know about the opportunity to maybe engage in some enrichment. I mean, I know that, and maybe it didn't, not that it was that long ago, but I was in high school, 1999 to 2003. I didn't know about opportunities to find out more about the American Revolution. I would have absolutely loved it. I would have gone and spent a day or two there after school. It's why I couldn't get a girlfriend until I was a senior, because I would have loved that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I use that excuse too. But Crossroads is great for kids. They've got this book out, Meet Your Revolutionary Neighbors, and you can find a lot of them on their website as well. revolutionarynewjersey.org, I believe it is. And it's got great stories in there for kids. This book was put out for kids. Journal of the American Revolution has got hundreds and countless numbers of articles, and they're all free. It's on every possible subject. And that's the thing. You could, I'm not bashing teachers at all. They do fantastic work. Some of my favorite friends are teachers. I ran into my 5th grade teacher in Norwood last week. So, but you just don't have the time. There's so much history, so little time. And that's why, sometimes I used to cut college to go to the Newark Public Library and do research on the American Revolution.
But this is why I think it would be great to find a way in our education system to, in some way, make education a little less formal. And this is what I mean by that. You're right. Most of the teachers I know, and I have some of my family, do a fantastic job. They care about kids. But particularly earlier on, when you're managing multiple subjects, it's hard to be passionate about everything or an expert about everything. Why not be able to have Todd come into a high school classroom and teach for a few weeks on the American Revolution? I'd be happy to pay for that as a taxpayer.
Because you can't do that because you need certification, and there's all kinds of rules and regulations. They were
again a topic that I know that you and I, Dan, it's a favorite of ours, but this conversation brings out of me because so often, what do you hear kids say about history?
Well,
it's boring.
I was very fortunate growing up in Dumont. I went to Dumont High, and starting my sophomore year, they let me start to lecture my history class. And by senior year, they gave me all the U.S. history classes to lecture. That was always the day before Thanksgiving. So history classes all got me in the morning, and then it was on to the pep rally that afternoon to cheer on our team against the dreaded Tenafly team, which obviously were evil people.
So, of course. I think that rivalry probably still exists today.
Yeah, the Sharks, forget it. It's child's play.
So we're rounding the hour mark here, and I don't want to keep you too long. Although we have to have you back at some point to expound on some of these topics because I'm having a ton of fun. But I thought maybe you could address some points about the American Revolution in New Jersey that maybe controversial is the wrong word, but that there's a lot of debate or maybe there's a lot of misinformation. First and foremost, were the Hessians drunk when George Washington crossed the Delaware?
No, there's no real evidence of that. I just actually attended or actually spoke at a conference of the Company of Military Historians down in Princeton. It's one of my organizations, and we did a whole day's tour of Trenton and Princeton, going over the battles there. And the Hessians the Hessians lost because the Americans had 24 pieces of artillery and the Hessians had 6. And that was the real reason they lost. Trenton was an artillery battle. I mean, Washington famously said, when he was warned that the sleet and the snow and the rain might render the men's muskets unusable. Black powder weapons don't work well in wet things. Then he says, by God, then we'll use the bayonets. I'm determined to take Trenton, make a great movie scene. Well, like I said, has made a great movie scene. But he's taken all these artillery pieces with him. And Trenton is one of the very, very few urban battles of the American Revolution. The only other one really being the American assault on Quebec on New Year's Eve, 1775, which was an utter disaster. As successful as Washington taking Trenton, Montgomery's and Arnold's attempt to take Quebec was a dismal failure that ended Montgomery's life. But the Americans did a great job and in divergent columns, being able to cut off about 2/3 of the Hessians. About 1/3 of the Hessians went south to join other Hessian troops in Burlington or south of Trenton. And so he did a fantastic job there, but drunk, no. The Hessians had been really sniped at with little foraging parties or clandestine parties that had been crossing the river, or New Jersey militia attacking outposts and whatnot. So they were on edge to begin with. Their guard wasn't really down. They had not been up partying all night.
They were literally outgunned.
Yeah, absolutely outgunned in the very literal sense of the word. And keep in mind, Washington actually had 2 other crossings that were intended for that battle, both of whom turned back because of the weather. The troops under Washington themselves, 2,400 men, were the only ones that actually crossed the river that night. The 2/3 of his army never made the crossing.
Molly Pitcher, is she real? And if she was real, who is she?
Yes. There's a lot of debate about Molly Pitcher, her role, who she was, and that sort of thing.
Did she found the rest stop, or did she not found the rest stop?
Well, I think she was reduced to just the Starbucks. But there were many great revolutionary women from New Jersey. In fact, the Museum of the American Revolution in Philadelphia, I'll give a plug out for them as well. Fantastic new museum that only opened a few years ago, just had an exhibit close in April on when New Jersey women could vote. We focus on the suffrage movement, of the late 19th century, early 20th century. But the first New Jersey Constitution, passed during the Revolution, enabled all people to vote, and women voted in New Jersey until the right was taken away from them when the Constitution was tinkered with later on. But revolutionary women could vote in New Jersey. In fact, one of the women who was they focused on was the wife of a loyalist major who raised a battalion of troops for the British in what was known as West Jersey, because originally New Jersey was two. All right, what could be more fun than one New Jersey? Two New Jerseys.
Two New Jerseys. That's a lot of New Jersey to contemplate.
It is a lot of Jersey. You think pork roll and tail or ham is an argument? You
have both. You can have one for each.
East Jersey and West Jersey. Now that had ended decades before the Revolution, but that's why you still see it often referred to as the Jerseys. So they raised.
It's interesting, if you look at municipality lines, you can still see much of that East-West Jersey lineage. I was looking at a map recently. Somebody tweeted, it was a reporter in New Jersey. It might have been Matt Friedman of Politico. And you can see it kind of line up. So that's still with us.
Actually had a hospital in Camden, where I grew up in Camden, called West Jersey Hospital.
West Jersey Hospital, the legacy endures.
I always thought that was sort of weird. And, I even remember asking my parents about it. I said to them, do we live in West Jersey? Is this West Jersey? Oh, I guess the name went back a long ways. I don't know.
Yeah. And in fact, my first reenactment group that I joined in 76 was the East Jersey Artillery Company. The militia had raised two artillery companies for the 76 campaign, the East Jersey Artillery Company and the West Jersey Artillery Company. So West Jersey was, still in people's hearts, if not legally, an entity at that point. So it's just one of the cool little side things. But yeah, her husband was the commander of the West Jersey Volunteers. He abandoned her, and she became important in securing the right of New Jersey women voting, even if it was taken away, somewhat later.
Fascinating. And I know something else that when I was preparing for tonight, I was trying to cram a little bit, and a friend of mine brought this up and insisted that I reference this tonight, that the Betsy Ross flag was raised for the first time in Somerset County in Bound Brook. Washington and his army actually raised it there. Is that accurate?
That I have no idea about. There was a battle of Bound Brook, I believe in April of 1777. It was not an American victory.
So it would have been a strange time to raise the flag.
I don't think the flag was authorized until June of 1777. The Battle of Bound Brook would have been before that, so I don't think that time-wise lines up. There are so many varieties of American flags, though, star arrangements and whatnot, stripe colors, all different things like that.
And we've been doing a little series at Save Jersey on our founding fathers from New Jersey who signed the Declaration. And, Francis Hopkinson, he was intimately involved with the design. And there was a whole saga related to that I think is fascinating. So definitely check out our Francis Hopkinson post, which I think we're putting up tomorrow or Friday. It's all blending together.
I think it's great that you guys have, done so much for history, and are doing this tonight. The folks can never, get enough history. Sure, that's easy for me to say, but if we don't, study history, then who is going to study history? And we got to teach this to the kids. I was out at Monmouth Battlefield this past Sunday, and there were parents there with their kids, talking to reenactors and whatnot. And it was, that, really warms your heart to see that sort of thing. When kids come to our site at Historic Newbridge Landing for the Bergen County Historical Society. I've never had kids. I don't know how to deal with kids sometimes, but we have this one great item in our collection, which is from the early 1800s, I think 1808. But it's basically a wooden school backpack that some kid put his books and his writing stuff in there. What kid today doesn't have a backpack going to school? It's the one thing that, I found something I can relate to with a kid. A kid instantly recognizes, okay, kid 200 years ago had this. Things maybe aren't entirely different. Once you tell them that there's no internet, and then calm them down. So it's there's so many ways you can try to reach someone, to try and connect, to make things, the complex, understandable.
Well, I think you do a fantastic job of that. Todd Braisted, he's been our guest this evening on Save Jersey Live. Again, I've said it before. I'm going to say it 50 more times. I really appreciate you joining us tonight. Dan and I interview a lot of politicians. Sometimes it's more enjoyable than at other times, but this is one I was very excited for. And I'd want to have this conversation, whether it was being broadcast or not, because it's just such a fascinating, and as you just articulated very well, important thing for people to know, particularly here in New Jersey, that you have all this history which informs our present right at your fingertips. Todd, I know you mentioned your website earlier. Can you tell us what's the best way to get in touch with you and read some of what you've written and delve into these topics deeper?
Sure. You can, most of my writings, most of my articles, I should say, are on the website of Journal of the American Revolution, which is allthingsliberty.com. That's where you can find my writings. If you're really interested in loyalists, my own website is royalprovincial.com. That is the #1 website, cheap plug there, for loyalist studies. Obviously, I'm on Facebook. I developed my own Facebook lecture series, which is in sort of hiatus right now as in-person things go back. You can find my books on Amazon or wherever fine books are sold. Crossroads of the American Revolution, Revolutionary NJ, I believe that's .org. So those are the ones. If you want to check out Bergen County Historical Society, that's bergencountyhistory.org. We have some great shows going up. Our next real show is a vintage 19th century baseball game. So
that would be fun.
Yeah, we've done this every year. Obviously, we didn't do it last year, but it was one of the first events we wanted to do for this year. And the one team that's been in pretty much all of them, the Flemington Neshaniks, will be taking on a team that we raised in River Edge from some softballers. But they play by mid-19th century rules, basically from the 1860s. So they've got the uniforms, they've got the bats, no gloves. They've got an umpire in full black top coat and top hat and a cane. It's really a hoot. They play 2 games. They play 2 games in 3 hours. And they have a great time doing it. We generally
Honestly, I'm going to insult some baseball fans out there. Sounds better to me. Multiple games, 2-3 hours, top hats, no gloves. Sign me up. Not to play, but to watch.
Yeah, if you go, you're not a fan, you're a crank. That is what they refer to as.
Dan and I are leading cranks, actually, so I think we'd be perfect for this.
We are.
Absolutely.
Definitely have our crankier moments too, by the way.
That this is true. Watch every Wednesday to find the proof that you need for that, folks. Todd Braisted, thank you so much for joining us. And most of all, happy 4th of July.
Happy 4th of July, everyone.
Hope to have you back soon. I am Matt Rooney. I am with my main man, Dan Cerrucci. We will be back next Wednesday night with Assemblyman Brian Bergen. But between now and then, keep reading Save Jersey. Check out Todd's website. You know where the Dan Cerrucci blog spot is. Stay safe, stay sane, and keep doing everything you can to save Jersey. Have a great night, everyone. Happy Independence Day. Be safe.